Welcome to the Writer's Room. We're back. So is everybody excited about tomorrow's free teleclass in which I'm going to talk about the first 10 to 15 pages and why they're so critical, and a little bit about, in my role as Director of Development for Simon Says Entertainment, what we look for in a script, in plays and web series and treatments and screenplays. We look for a great story, and a great story that hasn't been told, and a great story where the execution of the story is superior, meaning good writing. And I've gotten some amazing feedback from folks about these classes and these videos, and amazing questions about, well, I can't get started. How should I get started? How do I stay on the page? Well, besides having a great script, what does a writer need? Okay. All a writer needs is a great story that's well executed in narrative. Plain old, plain old. And I hear all the time, well, I've never written anything, and I keep starting and I keep stopping, and I don't know how to stay on the page, and I don't know how to write without editing myself, and then I never finish anything. Okay. Swimming is like writing. My dad, I grew up in Miami. It's an island, right? The rest of my family's from the Caribbean, from Cuba and from the Bahamas. We all grew up on islands. Everybody's got to learn how to swim. I never heard of people not knowing how to swim living on an island. That's crazy. At least that was my parents' perspective. So my dad would make us watch the Olympians in the Olympic swim. We watched swimming all the time. And then he took us to the pool and threw us in. We were little toddlers. Guess what? We started swimming. At least dog paddling. Form wasn't great, but we have a general idea because we had been watching swimmers. And not just any old swimmer. Not just our Uncle Jojo swimming, across the pond. Like Olympic swimmers. And my dad going, see, look at his form. And now he's bringing the arms forward and pulling himself through the water. Okay, you can't swim if you've never seen anybody swim. I hear people telling me all the time, I've never written anything. I want to write something, but I don't know how to start. Well, do you read? Do you read books by good writers? Do you read scripts written by people that you want to write like? That's your first place. You should be a voracious reader. You're saying you want to write something, and you want people to take 4 or 5 hours out of their life to read it. Guess what? You better know what you're doing. You got to know what good-looking writing looks like so that you can move towards it. But if you're not filling your brain with it, if you're not spending some time every day reading good writing, how do you expect to become a good writer? Now, after my dad threw us in the water and said, okay, doggy paddle. And little kids, that's what you do in the womb. We did it automatically. We still had to learn form. So then he took us to the YMCA for summer camp, and we took lessons with the big kids on the form of it. Because my dad was like, you can't just know how to swim. What if we go fishing in the ocean, or we're going on a trip to go to the Bahamas and somebody falls off the boat and it capsizes? You got to know how to swim for your life. So you got to know how to do it well. So you better go get you some education on how to swim. Love my family. Just organic geniuses. Just intellectuals. Just on common sense. When I decided to become an artist, my father was like, well, who you like? Who's a craftsman? And I was like, oh, Daddy, this British actor. And oh, I really love her. And oh, I really love him. Do you watch him? No. We go on a Blockbuster so you can get some movies and watch him. And then find out where they went to school. And try and go to school there. like you're not reinventing the wheel. It's a similar thing with writing, where I get a lot of frustration from folks coming to me going, I don't know where to start, I can't stay on the page, I keep editing myself, I keep starting over, and then they hand me their 10 pages, and I look at it and I go, well, you're getting caught up in grammatical stuff, right? You're getting caught up in voice, because you've never written before, so you have an idea of what writing is supposed to sound like, instead of trusting that your own voice is your writing. The way you speak is your writing. The way you tell a story to another person, the story that's burning up inside of you, that's dying to fall out on the page, the way you tell it to another person and it's living and bubbling inside of you, that's your writer's voice. Not this idea of when you get to the page and I should put phrases, conjunctive phrases in front of the dangling participle and make it more poetic. That's not how people talk, right? It's also not active, right? I learned from Stephen King's On Writing. The passive voice is not your friend. The passive voice is never your friend. In the first 10 sentences that you write, if nothing has happened, you're not writing action. You're not writing narrative. right? What has happened, right? And the only way to get a full sense of when you're doing expositional writing and then when you're doing writing that is in your authentic voice, it's active. The story is active. People are trying to get something, is to read good writing. The second piece is to take a class or get a writing coach. That's what I did. Now, you could spend 20 years sitting there in front of your computer by yourself, never having taken a class, never written anywhere, never worked at a newspaper, never worked at a magazine, never took a writing class, never worked in a publishing office. If you don't work somewhere or volunteer somewhere where people make a living by writing, then you're not going to learn how to write. There it is. Right? Read great writers and then study with another great writer or a great teacher who may happen to be a writer as well. If you've got a choice of classes to take, you're an undergrad, take classes where you're going to be exposed to great writing. Are you an adult? Take a class where you're going to spend the summer being exposed to great writing. I was an English major at Vassar College. Now, that didn't teach me how to write plays or screenplays, but what it did teach me was what great writing looked like. Shakespeare, James Baldwin, George Eliot, Clara Barton. I learned. I was around great writers. Even in all of my classes, American culture and political science and reading Edward Said and Frantz Fanon and Foucault. Their narrative, the way they write, is fantastic. The way that they can encapsulate an entire century in 3 pages, that's amazing writing. If you are filling your brain with only good writing, then the thing that's going to come out at the end of the day is going to look like that, right? You want to be a great actor? If you watch PBS and you watch Shakespeare on TV all the time, well, you get to an acting class, well, learning standard just isn't that far away because your entire reality has been consumed with good acting and good speech, right? Want to be a poet? Read Dunbar. Read Langston Hughes. Read Zora. Yeah? E.E. Cummings. Mary Oliver. Read good writing all the time. Watch how people communicate complicated concepts with an image. Because that's what screenwriting is really all about. Letting the camera tell the story and you giving the camera as few words as possible to create the kind of poetry that you've envisioned in your mind. It's storytelling with imagery. It's a very specific kind of writing. I have to tell you, poetry and Shakespeare taught me about that kind of writing. That and working on the film Mother of George, which Simon Says Entertainment produced. And the first time I read that script, I was like, oh my God, this is beautiful. It has to happen now. The writing and the images were amazing. And it was a little over 80 pages long. But I saw the world. I felt by the smells and textures and colors of the world and how simply everything was communicated and the sparseness of the relationships. I felt and I saw the world long before it had been created. And that was in the writing. And I was like, I want to write great writing. So only watch good writing. If I'm watching something on TV and it's bad writing, I turn the channel. I read great writers. I read Jhumpa Lahiri. I don't want to write a novel, but I do understand that great novelists are communicating thousands of years of ideas in 100 pages. That's hard. They create entire worlds. It's amazing with texture and detail, far more texture and detail than a camera does, but they're still reducing ideas down the way they use sentences, the way the characters communicate their psychology to each other, even when they're not directly saying what they want. And screenwriting is just like that. Just like that. That's why Stephen King, I love his book on writing. You should read it. Stephen King talks about one thing that I can give you as a hint to take away from today. He goes into a blank room, no windows, just some coffee and some water. Used to be his typewriter. I think now he uses a laptop, but on writing, when he wrote that, it was just a typewriter. 6 hours a day, he doesn't leave. Nobody in his family interrupts him. If he sits there and writes, I don't know what to write, 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 for the whole 6 hours, that's what happens. But what he does is stay on the page. And when I read that, it reminded me of how I became a writer. I did the artist way. Most important takeaway I had from there was, I was wounded as a child and I can't journal. That's a bad idea. Oh my goodness, it's going to rain. But the most important thing I took away from The Artist's Way was that the morning pages were a way to teach me how to stay on the page without editing myself, which is the key skill that stops everyone. Start doing morning pages. Start with 3 a day. After a couple of weeks, add 3 more. What the morning pages do is teach you to write without stopping and without an agenda. To write when the writing is bad, to write when the writing is good, to write when you're busy, to write when you're depressed, to write when you're angry, to write your way into becoming a writer. Because you're a writer because you write, not because you talk about it. You're not even a writer because you take classes. You're a writer because you write. And the more you write, the more you will write. It's plain and simple. That no matter what, for those 3 pages and that 20-minute span, you do nothing but stay on the page and write longhand. And you do it longhand because the brain is forced to focus on writing. Whereas if you're doing the typewriter on the laptop, it's moving as fast as your brain, right? Whereas when you write longhand, it's a meditation. More ideas pop up. And then because you're writing with your hand and your brain is moving really fast and your hand's communicating the ideas, your hand is then forced to make sense of what the brain is doing. It's like a backward psycho, meditative process that teaches you how to write. Because the page wants to be clearer than what's happening in your brain. And that's what your hand is trying to do. I wrote an entire play in a 48-hour period, only because I had been journaling about that play in morning pages, 12 pages a day for 3 years. The play was already written. Every single scene was happening in those morning pages. And I'll tell the other secret about morning pages. If you do them today and tomorrow and then don't do them for 3 days and then pick them up another day and then do... Stephen King, on writing. Every time you come to the page, the next day, your brain picks up where the story was because you were in the story by the end of those 6 hours. But if you skip 2 days, your brain then has to go back to where you were 2 days previously. You've got to go back and read all the stuff that you wrote at the beginning of those 2 days just to help the brain remember where you were in the story, when you were on that burn and the story was moving and all the parts were fitting in. If you only get 10 minutes a day to write, write for 10 minutes. But don't let a day go by without writing. It is the continuity of daily coming to the page and learning how to stay